everyone, welcome to Handing the Shame Back, the channel dedicated 100% to the adult survivors of child sexual abuse in New Zealand and globally. We are not gender discriminate, we are not discriminating against anybody or however people identify who they are. If you're an adult and you survive child sexual abuse, we've got some great content for you. So welcome to the show. What we have ahead of us is a wonderful person who I think you're going to enjoy hearing from. And when I say enjoy, I have to add a trigger warning because obviously the content is about child sexual abuse, so we need to have trigger warnings in place. If for any reason you find yourself getting triggered or feeling upset, please do stop watching. Go to the show notes below and you'll be directed to some resource and support. In the meantime, I'd like to introduce you to our guest today. His name is Phil Goldstein. He's from Washington, D.C. He's a survivor of sibling sexual abuse. He is a poet. He is a pet parent, which I secretly love, and he's a husband. Welcome, Phil.
Thanks for having me, Gloria.
Awesome. Great that you're here and Washington, D.C. Wow. Hey, so as with most of the guests that come on the show, I guess I'm really interested in your story, however much or however little you feel comfortable to share. You're safe here, and our survivors watching this will actually get some information from you that you may not even be aware of. So by telling your story, you might help others begin to come to terms with their own. So Phil, what are you, how old were you? I guess what's the context for all of
Sure.
this?
Well, again, thank you for having me. Very glad to be here and talking with you and reaching your audience. So I grew up in a suburb of New York City, about half an hour, 45 minutes outside of New York City, Northwest, and um, had a pretty normal middle class experience growing up. And I would say the, big difference between me and a lot of my peers is that from the time that I was 10 to about 12 and a half, my older brother sexually abused me. And I never told anybody about it, not a single person in the world, until I was 30. And um, I think that looking back, the abuse, and the trauma of that really affected me in a lot of profound ways. I think that I felt like, this was something that I was just, deeply ashamed by. And um, I thought that it was something that was, not unique to me, but certainly something that was like about me, that there must be something about me that, this had happened. I think that I really, as a result, kind of strove even more than I had been before the abuse to be sort of the golden child in our family. It was just, my older brother and me and our parents, my mom and my dad. And, my older brother had learning disabilities and was in trouble a lot in school. And I was the, student who always got great grades and, did what he was told and all that kind of stuff. And I think that as time wore on, I really kind of leaned into that because I think at a subconscious level, I thought, well, if I start kind of coming apart at the seams as a result of this, they're going to know that something's up. And so I need to maintain this, level of perfection and achievement. And, even if my parents never consciously or overtly, I should say, told me that that's what they expected of me, um, I felt like that was what I had to do because I felt like I can't put something like this on their plate when they already have so much dealing with my brother. And so that's kind of the way that it went for a long time. And then, as I said, when I turned 30 and I started dating Jenny, the woman who's now my wife, um, you know, we were experiencing issues in our relationship, related to intimacy. And she really urged me to go see a therapist. And I had never been to therapy before for anything. I thought, therapy is for people with real problems, and I don't have any real problems. And I remember on the intake form for that therapist, there was a section of, questions that said, have you ever been the victim of physical abuse, neglect, emotional abuse, sexual abuse? And up until that point in my life, nobody had ever asked me, did something like this happen? And so I never had an opportunity to tell anybody because I wasn't going to willingly just divulge it. And, naive me looking back, I thought, gosh, well, if I fill in this intake form and I'm not truthful, and then something comes up in therapy that reveals that I haven't been truthful about this, I'm going to be in some kind of trouble, which is just like a crazy thing to think about. But that's where my mind was at that point. And so I checked yes. And I provided, some cursory details. And I remember at the first session that I had with that therapist, I explained to them, you know, this happened to me, but that's not why I'm here. I don't really want to talk about it. I'm here because I want to solve these problems in my relationship with my girlfriend. And, you know, I worked with her for a couple of months and then she left her practice. And she told me at our last session, look, I know that we haven't really talked about this, but in my experience, somebody who's had sexual abuse happen to them as a child, it's bound to ripple out into their life in all different kinds of ways. And, you know, I think that this is what's affecting your relationship with your girlfriend. I think you should tell her. I think you should tell your parents. And, you know, um, I did wind up telling my girlfriend a short while after that, and then told other family members and some friends. And it was very difficult at first, but I got more confidence in talking about it the more people that I told. I eventually wound up writing my parents a letter explaining things because I felt like if I told them over the phone or something, I wouldn't be able to get out everything that I needed to get out. And I was very grateful that they believed me, because I thought at first that they might not, but they believed me right away. But then they decided to basically not get involved, and they said this is something you should work out between yourself and your brother, and we don't want to get involved. And um, they became upset that I wanted them to confront my brother, and over time they grew quite sort of dismissive of what had happened because I think that they felt I was blaming them for the abuse. And I think that in retrospect, what I really just needed from them in that moment was for them to be by my side and support me and ask how they could help and sort of rush to my corner because, as you well know, even if you're, an adult in your 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s or whatever, and you tell your parents about some really profound childhood trauma, especially child sexual abuse, in that moment, you become a child again. And I think that my parents looked at me and they said, "Well, you're 30 years old, you've got a graduate degree, you've got a girlfriend, you've got a job, like you've got your shit together, pardon my cursing, but you've got it together. We don't need to get involved. You've got this, basically." And it was very profoundly hurtful. I've since, reconciled with my mom a bit, and we're talking. She apologized to me in a very sincere way at the end of last year, but I'm still not speaking with my dad. And I think I'm very proud of the progress that I've made since those early days, but I just wish in retrospect that I didn't have to do it alone without my parents' support. But, I did do it. And I wound up writing a book of poetry that was published last year called How to Bury a Boy at Sea. And it really was very cathartic and helped me process a lot of different emotions around things. And I'm grateful that it's been helpful to other survivors, especially other men. Um, and yeah, I continue to speak out about it because I think it's really important to do so.
Yeah. And look, Phil, so wow. What has emerged in your story is just so many really strong, powerful threads. So one is, if you're okay for me to bring it to your attention, when
Sure.
when we take, as children, every survivor watching, hello, beautiful ones. Um, every one of us as children takes on roles within our families. You took on the golden child, so potentially the peacemaker, the good one, the one that wasn't going to cause any ripples, because the opposite was true potentially with your brother. So what happens is your parents then got used to you being that, yeah? And it was at your cost, as you look back and see, that um, because you felt this overwhelming need to protect them by not causing any upset you never disclosed as a child. If we fast track to as an adult, they had got used to you being that golden child. And here you were, think about it, suddenly becoming the disruptor. So, in a way, that's quite interesting, because what it then did was cost you again, if I may, because they couldn't stand beside you. Now, of course, that's shifted, but I wonder what you think about me connecting those dots.
No, I think that that is completely true. I think that I was the one who always um, went out of my way to sort of be the calming presence or, be the one who didn't cause waves, didn't rock the boat. And, the way that my therapist put it was, for all those years, you were protecting not only your brother with your silence, but you were protecting your parents from the knowledge of what had happened. And I think me disclosing the abuse was a most profound rocking of the boat. And I think that it was very shocking to my parents. I know that my mom, in particular, has told me she felt a lot of shock and grief, and just, they were totally blindsided by it. But yeah, it was not just a rocking of the boat, but I think it was my desire to reckon with what had happened in our family and try to unpack how and why this had happened that really upset them, because it was a place that I don't think that they either wanted to or were able to go to, because I think that it would have caused them a profound sense of guilt and grief and hurt. And the result was that, I've spent a lot of time in therapy, unpacking for myself with my therapist how and why this happened. Um, but I think that it would have been beneficial for me for them to be a part of that, and they just weren't. And that's just the way that it went.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that it was a big role reversal, and I think that they were not prepared for that.
No. And it's when you think about it as well, um, the shock and the horror for them hearing this, of course, as we know, hearing it is quite different to experiencing this. And I 100% agree. When you are that adult, you are actually that child as you're disclosing to the people that were tasked with protecting and caring for you, i.e., parents. So it's quite powerful, the whole thing. And I think, well done you for finding that courage, and for survivors watching. It takes an enormous amount of courage to share with people that matter to you. And the shame does this. It immediately emerges 100 times stronger in us as we are finding the words, actually. So once it's done, it's so much better, isn't it, Phil, for feeling?
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember the months before I had told my parents, I wound up sending them a letter. And it was a very detailed letter that I had gone over many, many times with Jenny, my then girlfriend, and my therapist. And I just remember this intense feeling of anxiety about putting it in the mail, because I didn't think that they would believe me, or I don't know what I thought. I just, I wasn't sure what their reaction was going to be, and I was very nervous about it. And
Yeah,
you know, um, but afterwards, I was very relieved initially that they believed me.
yeah.
And yeah,
I'm so pleased that they did. And, that's so cathartic. Not all of our survivor family do have that. And I'm one of them. I wasn't believed. So I think that's interesting. The other thing you talked about, and I'd love the whole world to take this up on any form, on any medical form. I think it would be really helpful to have, are you a survivor of, or are you the victim of physical, sexual, psychological abuse? Because right there is the gold. That
yeah,
would, I think, help a lot of people who struggle to find the words, because immediately the medical professional dealing with them then understands what might be driving
yeah.
the
No,
behavior. So I love that. The other thing you briefly touched on was intimate relationships, and it's something for survivors we struggle with, and sometimes the shame can rear up again in that respect. For all of us as survivors who have experienced child sexual abuse, of course, it's going to appear in our intimate relationships because it's an intimate experience we're having. And so that's the place it will show. And
Yeah.
yeah, tell us about, I mean, what's your thought, Phil?
Well, I mean, you know, I in my 20s had kind of experienced erectile dysfunction a lot, and I honestly had never consciously connected the two together. But I think that a lot of it boiled and boils down to, you know, being in your head and not being embodied and in your body, and, going to a different place. And, when you're not consciously connecting it, you feel like, well, why is this happening? And you don't really have an explanation. But then, even after you do, and you're like, oh, I get it, you know, it's not easy to just, flick a switch and address it. And so, I've gone to sex therapy, and am now, I think, in a better, much healthier place with it than I was, a couple of years ago, even. Um, but yeah, it's difficult, and it's another sort of aspect of the shame.
Yeah.
Especially for, I mean, it goes both ways, for men and women, but I think for men especially, there's this, not only idea that, as a man, you're not supposed to let anybody take advantage of you or harm you or touch you in a way that you don't want to be touched, and all that macho BS. But also, uh sexual performance and being, virile and all that stuff, it's all kind of wrapped up together. And so it creates, I think, that extra layer of shame, that, probably inhibits a lot of men from speaking out, or, talking to somebody about what might have happened to them.
Yeah, it's that toxic male culture. And I don't believe, and I'm sure you would agree as well, it's not just men who create this culture. Women have a huge role to play in this as well, because the expectations that are put on the men sometimes come from women. So I think we need to stand alongside each other in support and solidarity. But it's interesting because it's so much harder, I believe, for a man to speak out because of that culture and because of that no permission given. And you and I have had a chat in the past on another panel, Phil, about this, where the narrative is you're meant to be tough, you're meant to be strong, you're meant to protect everyone. How could you have let that happen? So this is where we bring out the photo of the 10-year-old.
Yeah.
How on earth could you not let that happen? You've got no power in that situation. And I think that's where we need to look at that. I think too, regarding intimate relationships, I really struggled because I had been conditioned for 16 years to be the best sex slave I could be to anyone and everyone.
Mm.
So to suddenly go from that to being genuinely in my body and feeling genuine pleasure or sexual performance, as in not needing to perform, was a real challenge for me, and it
Mm.
took many, many decades. So I think intimacy in relationships is huge, and it's not often discussed. So thank you so much for raising that. I think that's one of the I agree with you, Phil. I think it's one of the key shame containers actually is,
Yeah.
yeah. So for you, moving on, were you able to ever deal with your brother? Well, first of all, how did it stop? And then were you ever able to confront him in later years?
I mean, I think that it stopped when we moved, when I was in the middle of the seventh grade, and we got separate rooms. And then it just kind of stopped. And, there may have been other things, going on that led it to stop, but that's kind of the big thing in my mind. And to answer your question, no, I've never directly confronted my brother about it. I mean, he obviously knows at this point that I've talked about this, and he's written me a series of increasingly angry letters and emails, being upset with me for talking about it and for, you know, basically, not sort of um, absolving him of this. And, um, I think that that's a really important point that I want to emphasize is that you, as a survivor, A, do not need to confront the person who's abused you. Um, and B, you do not need, if you don't want to, you do not need to forgive them for what they've done. Um, he has apologized to me in a letter that I didn't think was particularly sincere or focused on me. It was much more focused on him. Um, but an apology does not automatically equal or lead to forgiveness. I think that forgiveness is something that needs to be earned, and be something that the person who's offering the forgiveness genuinely wants to offer and provide. And my brother and I never had a particularly close relationship. Certainly, as we grew older, we're just very different people. And so I didn't really feel like there was a deep relationship to try to rescue. Um, and so that was a big part of it for me as well.
I think, and it's a very, powerful thought again that you have given us for survivors watching. I think whether you forgive or not is 100% your choice. I also think you are not more than or less than if you do.
Hmm. Completely agree.
It is 100% your choice. And if you decide to forgive, go you. If you decide not to forgive, go you.
Hmm.
It is not your burden to carry. And I think this is where sometimes as survivors, Phil, we end up having well meaning people say, oh, it might be, have you thought about forgiving? And you think, get your gear and piss off. Like, don't you don't you encroach on my psyche. I don't need your uninformed opinion on a huge thing like forgiveness.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's entirely up to you as the survivor.
Yeah.
And, I think that there are a lot of people, whether they're your immediate family, if it happened within your family, or, whoever, who will want you to forgive so that it will make them feel better. Um, and, so that they can move on from
Yeah.
this. And I think that one of the reasons for me why my parents probably got so upset with me, in addition to them saying really hurtful, terrible things like that my brother had no power over me, why didn't I leave the room, just minimizing a lot of things. I think one of the reasons why they were upset was because I wasn't letting them sort of move on without doing the hard work of reckoning with what had happened. And I think that they were very upset by that.
I mean, w- do you, as you look at that, does that make sense to you?
Which part?
No, the fact that they were upset by that.
Um, in a sense, yes. I can empathize with that, and I've talked about this a lot, with my therapy and with some other family members. I think that them having to sort of go back down memory lane and interrogate what was going on in their lives and in the life of our family during the years when this was going on would have made them realize that, yeah, we didn't notice that this was going on. We didn't see any signs. And maybe there weren't any signs for them to see, because I'm sure that I did a really good job of concealing it and staying quiet, and never breathing a word about it. But I think that it would force them to just reckon with the fact that this was happening under their roof and they didn't know about it. And I think that that would cause them a lot of guilt. And, I don't know whether my parents have, you know, processed this in their own, therapy. I'm sure, to a certain degree they have, but they didn't do it with me. And I had asked them sort of repeatedly and told them repeatedly that that's what I wanted. And the pushback that I got was, well, what's the point of that? It's not going to solve anything. It's not going to change anything. We can't go back and change, what happened. And
Um,
my therapist said to me, at one point, it's called post-traumatic stress, and in order to resolve it, you need to confront the actual trauma that happened, and they did not want to do that.
no, I think there was a continual missing of the point, Phil, a continual missing. But I am going to, with respect, gently disagree with one thing. I believe you would have shown signs. I believe as what children do is they don't talk, but through behaviour they show something's terribly wrong. Now it might have been that you didn't want to go to bed at a certain time, or it might have been that you avoided being anywhere near your brother. But make no mistake, whether you withdrew more or whether you hung around your parents more, there will have been something, Phil, because it had to emerge in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, in retrospect. I mean, he and I were not close, and maybe they chalk that up to the fact, oh, they're just two very different, children. But I also think, I was very mature always, um, for my physical, literal age. And I think that my parents took that as like this godsend and this good sign and this wonderful thing because, my brother was really a lot to handle. And, my dad even said, at one kind of parent teacher thing at school, he told me that he said to the teacher, oh, something to the effect of, my Philly, he's on autopilot. And I think that they just never had to worry about me. And I was always more comfortable with people in school who were older than I was and with the adults, with the teachers. I did the spring musicals in high school. And I remember feeling this very intense desire, even as like, a 14, 15-year old, to sort of be among the teachers, from the school who were working on the musical as the director or the assistant director, the choreographer, the orchestra conductor, whatever. And I think that there's a lot of kids who sort of get labeled as, oh, he's an old soul. And I think that they mean it genuinely endearingly. Um, you know, but I think that the flip side of that, or the dark side of that coin, is that a lot of kids who have experienced trauma and abuse, have to grow up and become more mature than they're supposed to be, earlier than they're supposed to be, because they're dealing with these really profound emotions and feelings, or they want to gravitate towards older people who might be, this safe harbor for them if they don't have that safe harbor at home, for example.
Yeah.
And so, I think that I don't fault any sort of teacher for not recognizing that something was going on, because I was not giving any indication that something was going on. But I think looking back at my own behavior and my own way of being in the world, it was clear that I wanted that safety of being among other adults as an adolescent.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because as you're describing this, what's going through my head is, and I don't want to project onto you, but I don't feel like I had a childhood because I was always parentified.
Mhm.
And some of what you're saying is resonating, Phil, because it feels like your childhood was really much more around you doing the protecting and the parenting, which is what we know parents do. So the responsibility for things were left with you, unspoken and unasked, but nevertheless, we're left with you. So sometimes I think, as children who have gone through this type of trauma, it's hard for us to just get out and play in the street and enjoy ourselves, as kids, when this is going on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I don't want to say that my childhood was sort of robbed or cut short or anything like that, because I did have a very genuinely happy and loving childhood.
Yeah.
And it's not like I was neglected, or that there was like physical want, or that I, was never taken on a vacation or something like that. but I think that, uh, early on in my sort of correspondence with my parents after I had told them about the abuse, I think that I said the phrase in an email, that I felt neglected. And I think that they took issue with that because they took it to mean sort of the obvious signs of neglect of, oh, we didn't, how can you say that? We paid attention to you, we put you in this club, we did this for you, we did that for you, you were never, you never really wanted for anything. And I think that I probably should have rephrased it in retrospect and said something like, I felt very isolated and alone and like I couldn't talk to you,
Yeah.
because those were all very true.
Well, and of course, and we see it play out in families, Phil, where there can be a sibling with special needs or with a very serious illness, for instance. It's often the siblings that are okay that that are thought of as being okay, whether or not that's true. So I think there's a little bit of that in there. But let's move on because we're going to move towards closeout in about 5 minutes. So I guess I just love our audience. Aren't we lucky, audience? Look at what Phil's bringing to us today. But I'd love for you to maybe share with us, what helped you? What helped you through your recovery of
Mm.
this and
Uh,
healing?
I mean, a lot of things. Um, we, I think that we, get a lot of strength. I certainly got a lot of strength from feeling like you are in a relationship with somebody where you feel safe enough to disclose. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a intimate romantic relationship with somebody. It could be any kind of relationship with anybody. But having somebody there in your life who you trust, who is not going to shame you or make you feel guilty, and it's it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy to get to that point. You have to take a leap of faith in that person. But I think that once you do and you recognize that they're not going to shame you or guilt you or abandon you or get upset with you, it becomes much easier to recognize that there are other people like that in your life,
Yeah.
that almost everybody is going to be like that. And the people who aren't, those are the outliers. So that's number one. Uh, Number two, working with a trauma-informed therapist
Yeah.
is really critical. So, finding, a licensed counselor or therapist in your area who, has had experience dealing with trauma, whether that's, child sexual abuse or other kinds of trauma, I think is really important. I mean, great, obviously, if they have CSA experience, but even if they don't, just helpful to have somebody professional to talk with and help you through the journey. Um, and then for me, the big thing was art, was creative writing and poetry, specifically. But I think it could really be any kind of artistic expression, and not even really art, something that allows you to give of yourself and process your emotions in a constructive external way. For me, that was writing. For somebody else, it could be dancing or painting or exercising or, running marathons or whatever, or volunteering. It could be anything. But I think that finding an outlet for your emotions is really critical because, as you know, so many survivors hold on to what happened to them in silence for years, for decades, and it builds up, you know, physically in you. It builds up, and it's so important to find a way to dissipate that in a measured, constructive way. And you deserve to. Everybody deserves to, because nobody should have to carry so much weight like that inside them forever.
Well, and it also helps people in handing the shame back, which is what we carry. Phil, do you have a copy of your book with you to hand, please?
Um, I don't have it right on me,
Okay.
but
Where
it's
can
called.
people find it?
People can find it anywhere you get books. You can get it on Amazon or bookshop.org, or go to my publisher's website, Stillhouse Press, or my website, which is philagoldstein.com. And the book is called How to Bury a Boy at Sea. It came out last year. It's a book of poetry, not a memoir. Memoir, sort of in verse, I guess you could say. But yeah, you know, I would recommend it obviously to any and all survivors, but also to their loved ones, because I think that it's important for people to, it was obviously important for me to process what happened to me, but I think it's important for other survivors and the people in their lives who love them to know what this is like and what the feelings are like of the child who's going through this, and then how that carries into the adult person that they become.
Yeah. I think that's a really powerful message because I think that the supporters out there of survivors, whether they're blood family or whether they're chosen family, um, won't understand fully unless they have information around this. It's really challenging. So, just as we're finishing, is there any last words before we finish off today, Phil?
No, I would just say, you know, I think that it's really important for survivors in general to know that you're not alone, even though it may feel like it, even though it may feel like this is some terrible thing that happened to you, specifically to you and because of you, that's not true. That's what I felt when I first started dealing with this, but, um, fortunately slash unfortunately, because I'm sad that there are so many, but there are so many other survivors of child sexual abuse out there, and if you want to, if you feel comfortable doing so, you can find community and fellowship, with fellow survivors. And it's important for you to know that you're not alone and there are other people out there who get what you're going through and are there to support you.
It's amazing. Hey, stay there, Phil, please. Audience, how lucky are we? And below this in the show notes, we'll have all of Phil's contact details so that you can reach out to him across social media as well. So amazing to have had him on the show today, and a few things really resonated. Well, actually, all of it did, but a couple of things that I loved in particular were the roles that we play as children of this trauma and in families. So I think that was really interesting, alongside the intimate relationships and how that can surface in there, and of course it does, survivors. So stop beating yourselves up. This is to be expected. And I guess finally, from me to you, as always, I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you. Please do like, subscribe, and share this video.